why are White House officials then meeting with Representative Boebert in an effort to try and get her to not sign this petition calling for the release of the files?
Doesn't it show transparency that members of the Trump administration are willing to brief members of Congress whenever they please?
U.S. President Donald Trump and his administration ramped up a pressure campaign on congressional Republicans who are pushing for a full release of the Justice Department's files about the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, rushing to head off a House vote on the matter. But even as the White House made last-ditch moves to block action, proponents of a vote reached a critical threshold to force one, winning the final signature on a petition that will require the House to bring up the matter in the coming days. By Wednesday night, House Speaker Mike Johnson, who has opposed considering the measure, said he would relent and bring it to a vote next week.
Thank you for asking the question. We have been for maximum transparency of the Epstein files from the very beginning. What I was opposed to is the reckless disregard that was used in drafting the discharge petition. And we've been over this many times, but it was not drafted in such a way that it would adequately protect innocent victims. We have a responsibility to do that. There's as many as 1,000 women, by some estimates, of people who have been victimized because of the sex trafficking and Epstein and all these horrendous, heinous crimes, and we can't have them subjected to any further harm. So we wanted to make sure that they were properly, whose names were properly redacted out of the files. But the discharge petition is not only reckless, it is also a totally moot point. The Oversight Committee has been working, as you all know, around the clock, working on this. And you have some of the toughest members of Congress on the Republican and Democrat side who are working in bipartisan fashion to go through and release those files. As we stand here tonight, I think we're up to over 50,000 pages of records that are out in the open. You can go online tonight if you're at home and go through it yourself. And the Epstein estate files thus far has been the biggest tranche of important information. We found that outside of the scope of the discharge petition because it was never even anticipated or included in the discharge. The Oversight Committee, well, let me finish. The Oversight Committee has been digging into that, and some of the most valuable information was in the estate files. It includes Jeffrey Epstein's own personal logs, his travel logs, his financial ledgers, his daily calendar. All this is now out in the public, and more is to come. Chairman Comer of the Oversight Committee has done an extraordinary job. You have, again, some of the most notable members in Congress working on that around the clock, and they will continue to have full disclosure. I want to say this tonight, and I think this is a shame to a lot of the Hill Press Corps. I'm not going to name any of you by name, but I haven't seen many stories written yet about the fact that we put the discharge up for unanimous consent on the floor tonight. The Republicans, the Speaker, and the Republicans asked for unanimous consent to just go ahead and pass the discharge because I think it's a moot point. The Democrats objected to the unanimous consent. Nobody's written a story about that. That's stunning to me. How can you miss that? If it was about transparency, if it was about full disclosure, there's two questions you should ask every Democrat in the House and Senate. Why didn't you bring this up during the 4 years of the Biden administration when the Biden DOJ had all these records the entire time? Nobody ever said a word about it. They didn't care. Now it's the biggest thing in the world. Didn't matter at all when Joe Biden had the files. And secondly, if they're for transparency and they really want all this to be out and there's such this urgency, then why did they vote down the unanimous consent to pass the discharge petition tonight? I can't answer that question, but they should. And every one of you should ask them about it. Yes.
It came the same day that top officials had summoned Representative Lauren Boebert, who has signed the petition, to a meeting in the White House Situation Room with Attorney General Pam Bondi and FBI Director Kash Patel to discuss her demand to release the files, according to two people familiar with the matter. Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, confirmed that the meeting had taken place, calling it an example of transparency and how administration officials are willing to sit down with members of Congress and address their concerns.
These emails prove absolutely nothing other than the fact that President Trump did nothing wrong. And what President Trump has always said is that he was from Palm Beach and so was Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein was a member at Mar-a-Lago until President Trump kicked him out because Jeffrey Epstein was a pedophile and he was a creep. And this email you refer to with the name of a victim that was unredacted now and has since been reported on in this room, so I will go ahead and say it, Virginia Giuffre. And it was CBS's own reporting, Ouija, that recently wrote that Miss Giuffre maintained, and God rest her soul, that she maintained that there was nothing inappropriate she ever witnessed, that President Trump was always extremely professional and friendly to her. And so I think it's a question worth asking the Democrat Party, and you should all go ask them after this briefing, of why they chose to redact that name of a victim who has already publicly made statements about her relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and is unfortunately no longer with us. Mary.
Thank you, Karoline. Two questions on this. In the interest of transparency, why not just go ahead, release the full files on Epstein, get this all over with?
This administration has done more with respect to transparency when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein than any administration ever. In fact, this administration, the Department of Justice, has turned over tens of thousands of documents to the American people. We are cooperating and showing support for the House Oversight Committee. That's part of the reason you are seeing these documents that were released today, because of the House Oversight Committee's and Republicans' efforts to get these out to the public. This administration also moved, the Department of Justice also moved to unseal grand jury testimony, which we know, unfortunately, a judge declined those requests. So this administration has done more than any, and it just shows how this is truly a manufactured hoax by the Democrat Party. For now, they're talking about it all of a sudden because President Trump is in the Oval Office. But when Joe Biden was sitting in there, the Democrats never brought this up. This wasn't an issue that they cared about because they actually don't care about the victims in these cases. They care about trying to score political points against President Trump, as we have, of course, seen with this government shutdown. And this entire thing, again, it's not a coincidence to the American people at home. There are no coincidences in Washington, D.C. And it is not a coincidence that the Democrats leaked these emails to the fake news this morning ahead of Republicans reopening the government. This is another distraction campaign by the Democrat and the liberal media, and it's why I'm being asked questions about Epstein instead of the government reopening because of Republicans and President Trump.
But given your interest in transparency, Karoline, why are White House officials then meeting with Representative Boebert in an effort to try and get her to not sign this petition calling for the release of the files?
Doesn't it show transparency that members of the Trump administration are willing to brief members of Congress whenever they please? Doesn't that show our level of transparency? Doesn't that show the level of transparency when we are willing to sit down with members of Congress and address their concerns? That's a defining factor of transparency. Having discussions with members of Congress about various issues, and I'm not going to detail conversations that took place in the Situation Room in the press briefing room.
Boebert is one of 3 Republican women in the House who have signed on to the petition, which calls for a vote on a resolution demanding that the Justice Department, within 30 days, release all of its investigative files on Epstein, who died by suicide in 2019. Later in the day, Representative Adelita Grijalva, whom Republicans had avoided swearing in for nearly 2 months, was finally allowed to take her oath and immediately provided the final signature needed to force action on the Epstein measure. Even if the resolution were to pass the Republican-led House, it would almost certainly be dead on arrival in the Senate, and Trump would surely veto it. The president has lobbied intensively behind the scenes to prevent such a vote. Trump called Boebert on the phone, according to 2 people familiar with the call, a day before Johnson was set to swear in Grijalva, who had pledged to provide the 218th signature needed to force the Epstein vote. Trump reached out by phone to Representative Nancy Mace of South Carolina, another of the Republicans who have signed the petition, according to a person familiar with the calls, but the two did not connect. Instead, Mace, who is running for governor, wrote Trump a long explanation of her own history of sexual abuse and rape, and why it was impossible for her to change positions, according to a person familiar with her actions. Trump's allies in Congress have also sought to thwart a vote on releasing the material, in part by opening their own investigation in the House Oversight Committee into Epstein. The flurry of lobbying from the White House came as Democrats on the House Oversight Committee released 3 emails in which the disgraced financier suggested that Trump knew more about Epstein's abuse than he has acknowledged. But Republicans on the oversight panel quickly sought to discredit the messages, releasing tens of thousands of other pages of documents in which they were contained, in an apparent bid to downplay and shift attention away from them. In a social media post, Trump claimed the renewed focus on what he called the Epstein hoax was a tactic by Democrats to deflect blame for causing the government shutdown.